So even as we monitor the impact of coronavirus on health and also on our economy, voters are heading to the polls in 3 critical states in the Democratic primary, Sagar.
That's right. Joining us now to break it all down is Team Rising. We have Rachel Bovard. She's the Senior Director at the Conservative Partnership Institute. And we have Don Calloway. He's a Democratic strategist, 2 great friends of the show. It's great to see you guys. Thanks for bearing with us in this condition. And as Crystal mentioned, Don, people are still going to the polls in 3 different states. I just got a breaking alert from the Bernie Sanders campaign saying to their voters that going to the polls is a, quote, personal decision for people, not a ringing endorsement of get out the vote effort. I mean, we've never dealt with something like this before. Crystal and I are both kind of adamant in that something should have been done in order to prevent a lot of this in-person congregation. I know you've talked a lot about, expanding the franchise and making voting easier, but in terms of this right now, what is the immediate impact and what are the political implications possibly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that voter turnout will be dramatically reduced in the states that have decided to carry on their elections today. By the way, I think that that's the right decision, is to continue to carry out the election today. It's a very difficult one. So I really don't blame states like Ohio for postponing, although I think that's the wrong call. If you move the election from today to some period into the future, perhaps some of the drop-off can be offset by voting by mail, which is what they're hoping for. But to be clear, you will not see the same turnout that you will see on June 2nd in Ohio that you would have seen today had the elections continued. I think that people are well aware of how they can distance themselves even when you have to appear in person somewhere. Wear a mask, you can keep your distance, folks are elbow bumping to the extent that you have to have any contact whatsoever. But I think that you will see dramatically reduced turnout in Ohio and other states who have postponed their elections on June 2nd. It makes it harder to vote. My fundamental philosophy is to always make it easier to vote. I don't even know that everyone will get the memo, so to speak, that when the new election day is in states who have chosen to postpone. So I think we're going to see dramatic turnout reduced, and that's never a good thing for democracy in my view.
Yeah.
But Don, on the other hand, you're effectively disenfranchising the elderly, anyone with underlying health conditions. I mean, it's really a public health disaster when you could delay and just have people vote by mail. I mean, we've seen how effective that is in other states. The CDC says we shouldn't be gathering in groups of 10 or more. You and I have both watched with dismay the massive lines at some of these polling places. Now, I don't know if we'll see those today, but it also puts, the poll workers at risk as well.
Yeah, that's my biggest concern, is the health and safety of the poll workers. But if an election is run properly, then there shouldn't be massive gatherings at various polling places.
You and I both know that's not reality, though.
Yeah, I get it. And again, that shows that we should be having a larger talk about democracy, about access to not only the franchise, which is voting large philosophically, but access to the ballot box, which is procedures on election day. And that should have been a larger part of our discussion procedurally for the last 2 years since 2018. And we just, honestly, let's be clear, no state, no municipality has really done the work over the time between elections such that we would be prepared for something like this.
Right. And Rachel, in terms of the political implications here, we just had Ryan Grimm, who was on the show. He was talking about how it might he floated the radical possibility. He said Sanders should basically just suspend his campaign because in order to stop people from coming to the ballot box. And he said that both Biden and Sanders have not shown leadership here. But he also floated this interesting possibility, which is that say this does happen. Say all these elderly people who overwhelmingly are probably going to support Joe Biden don't come out to vote, and 90% turnout loss. And are people really going to accept the results of the primary election that is a result of today anyway? Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to shake a lot of people's confidence, because no one wants to put themselves at risk. No one wants elderly people to put themselves at risk going to the ballot box. So I do think that, the campaigns need to sort of come to terms with this. It's bigger than them at this point. But again, this goes back to this idea that coronavirus itself has exposed not only the weaknesses in our economy, but just fundamentally, the weaknesses in how we do things, right? Going to the ballot box is a very American thing. But when it puts us at risk, what do we do? I mean, Congress is grappling with this too. They can't proxy vote. They have to be there to vote. Right. And so we're sort of dealing with all this fallout. But I do think that campaigns need to show. I think Brian is probably right. They need to show a little bit more leadership here, because people are going to be at risk, and it's not just people getting sick. It's, to your point, not accepting the outcome of election, where voters were kept away by not wanting to catch coronavirus.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Don, that was the hypothetical Ryan floated, and I don't know how likely this is, but it's interesting to think through. Like, let's say that turnout is down 90%. You have 10% of the electorate show up. It's the young and the healthy people who support Bernie Sanders. Yeah. Do you think for 1 second Tom Perez, the Democratic establishment, are going to say, oh, okay, Bernie won Florida then. It's a new day. We're just going to accept that support? Of course not. Of course they're not.
Whoa! Yeah.
Titanic
absolutely. They won't accept it. It will be reminiscent of 2008 when you had the Rules Committee meet well into the summer to discuss the fate of the delegates from Michigan and Florida. Remember when those two states changed their time?
Right.
Not that, of course, it's not a situation, but ultimately you will have some type of rule making and litigating and internecine battles long after the fact to decide what's going to be the fate of those votes and ultimately those delegates. This is going to be a disaster. Welcome to 2020. I mean, there's really nothing else to say. It's unprecedented, and we have no manual to talk about how to deal with these types of things going forward.
I saw somebody tweet, apologies to 2019 for all the mean things we said. Don, on a serious note, I mean, what do you think is the future for Bernie Sanders' campaign? We had the debate this week that was eagerly anticipated head-to-head. I think Sagar and I both felt like Bernie didn't do nearly enough to change the game there. Of course, the national situation is rapidly evolving, and what voters care about is rapidly changing. What do you think that he should do from a political perspective and from like a public interest perspective?
Yeah, I don't see perhaps it's not mathematically impossible at this time, but I don't see a realistic path for Bernie to win the nomination. I also am not one who would tell his millions of committed supporters, and not to mention the actual staff who are working on this thing, that they need to drop out. However, at this point, I think that the reasonable mind would say there's no path for him to the nomination. So I think that, as Rachel pointed out earlier, the Overton window is a real thing. And he needs to think about what is most important to him in his policy agenda that he can demand be enacted by the Biden administration and, frankly, also by the Biden campaign. I think that Joe Biden, if you watch, we talked last week on the show, and we talked about how he has made all the concessions he's going to make. I disagree with that, because if you watch, he has quietly shifted some of the things on his policy page, where he's now advocating, maybe not actively advocating, but his policy positions on his website now talk about free public college and not just community college. So I think that that Bernie needs to figure out the major points that he needs to be extracted from Biden's advocacy going forward, and that needs to be his legacy.
That's the interesting thing, Rachel, that Crystal and I was kind of looking at it as a thought experiment with Joe Biden, is he's doing these things like the college plan to try and appeal to younger voters that had voted for Sanders. But in my view, it actually is kind of shows even more of the misstep, because he's basically embraced the Pete Buttigieg plan, which the Sanders campaign went to war with Buttigieg over. And so it seems that he could end up carrying the electoral baggage. This is kind of my read of it. He'll carry the electoral baggage of embracing some of these policies and attacks on the right, while also not even really getting or validating the concerns for younger voters who backed Bernie Sanders. And he's kind of putting himself in an electoral mismatch even more so. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think that's why it's really important for Bernie to stay in the race, to be honest. Like, he has to think about his legacy is this revolution. His legacy is pointing out the vast distinction between himself and Joe Biden and what that represents for the Democrat Party. Now, he has to be able to do that going forward. The debate that I saw this week didn't demonstrate that, right? He didn't really draw, I don't think, clear distinctions between himself and Biden. One in particular on China. He had a huge opening to go after Joe Biden's long record of deferring to China, talking about how we need to reduce our dependency, and he totally whiffed, and he didn't even take the opportunity. So if he's going to continue to do that, then maybe you look at opportunities to make your way out. But if he's going to have ice in his veins and continue to just hit at where he's soft, where he's not representing, I think, where the progressive left is, that's a helpful distinction, I think, for voters and for the Democrat Party going forward. Now, right. he has to be a knife fighter. I don't know if he's willing to do it.
I also think it's important to have his voice during this crisis and, in the elevated status of a current presidential campaign, because, look, Biden has taken the tact of let's just deal with the test kits and the crisis that's in front of us. We have to do that. But we also have to think, as both of you said, really, really well about the longer term and how we build a durable, more equitable, more just reality for all Americans, including working class Americans coming out of this. And Bernie Sanders is a really critical voice on all of that. As are both of you. We appreciate you both. Both great. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll have more rising for you after this.